Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We are going to be tackling something pretty big today.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, so we're going to be exploring all of the factors that put a strain on the British Empire in the period between World War I and World War II.
Hmm.
You know the saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire?
Right.
Well, we're going to see what happens when the weight of that empire gets to be too much to handle.
Yeah, it's interesting, because despite how vast it was, the British Empire had to deal with so many problems all at the same time, problems that ultimately led to its downfall.
Right, and a good place to start with that, I think, is the economy. All of our sources talk about how key industries like shipbuilding were really struggling. The Great Depression hit Britain pretty hard, and it was just super expensive to keep up a global empire.
Totally.
Yeah,
Think about it. Like, imagine you're trying to maintain this huge military, keep all these naval bases going all over the planet, and then keep all those supply lines open, but your economy is, like, shrinking.
yeah, that's not good.
Not good at all.
So you get these economic problems, and then on top of that, things are getting really tense globally.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The 1930s saw the rise of some really aggressive regimes like Imperial Japan.
Oh, yeah, and fascist Italy.
Yes. And of course, Nazi Germany.
Right. And each of these pose their own unique threats to the British Empire.
For sure, yeah.
Japan's ambitions in Asia were a huge concern, especially because of Britain's interest in places like Singapore.
Right. And Italy's actions in Africa, like when they tried to conquer Abyssinia in 1935, really challenged Britain's dominance there.
Yeah, and then there's Germany just looming large over everything with their growing power in Europe.
Yeah.
So you've got these problems at home with the economy and then these aggressive regimes abroad. Seems like Britain was really caught between a rock and a hard place. How did they even begin to try and deal with all of this?
Well, I think at first there was some hope that maybe the League of Nations would help to maintain some kind of international security.
Right, it was formed after World War I to, like, prevent future conflicts.
Exactly, this noble idea, but unfortunately, it really wasn't all that effective against these new threats.
Right, and that's when we start to see the policy of appeasement.
Right.
This was Neville Chamberlain's big idea, trying to avoid another world war.
Yeah, appeasement involved making concessions to these aggressor nations in the hopes that they would be satisfied and war could be avoided.
Right.
And it was very controversial, driven by, the horrors of World War I, this deep desire to prevent that from happening again.
But it seems like appeasement didn't really work out the way that they had hoped.
It didn't in a lot of ways. It was based on a misjudgment of Hitler and Mussolini.
Right.
They saw appeasement as a sign of weakness, and it just made them more bold.
Right, and the fall of Singapore in 1942 really highlights this failure, I think.
Hmm.
Britain spent a ton of money, 25 million pounds, fortifying Singapore.
Wow.
They thought it would deter Japan.
Yeah, it's a really good example of how appeasement backfired.
Yeah.
And the fall of Singapore was a huge blow to British prestige. It showed the limits of their imperial defense.
Yeah.
It really revealed that there was this growing gap between what Britain had committed to around the world and what they could actually defend.
Right, it wasn't just about money, but about, a failure in strategy. They thought Singapore was going to hold them back, but Japan got through.
Right.
External threats were definitely a problem. But then back in the colonies themselves, things are getting pretty tense too.
Absolutely. Nationalist movements were gaining a ton of momentum, especially in India.
Yeah.
Figures like Gandhi and Nehru were leading these movements and using strategies like non-cooperation and civil disobedience to challenge British rule.
Yeah. And can you give us a specific example of what this resistance looked like? What was happening on the ground?
Yeah, so one of the sources talks about this salt march that was led by Gandhi in 1930, where thousands of Indians marched to the sea to protest the British salt tax.
Wow.
It was peaceful, but these acts of defiance sent a really strong message.
Right. They put a lot of pressure on the British administration.
For sure.
Yeah. And this wasn't just happening in India either, was it?
No, not at all.
You're right. Nationalist movements were popping up all over Africa and the Dominions, too, like
Yeah.
Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the Irish Free State, all demanding more autonomy.
Right.
And this just stretched British resources even thinner and forced them to deal with all of these problems at the same time.
Right.
So putting it all together, you've got this failing economy, threats from all these powerful countries all over the world, and then a growing unrest within the empire itself.
Exactly. The British Empire, despite its size and its history, was being pulled in so many directions.
Right.
All these pressures, and then on top of that, you've got World War II. All of this led to its decline.
Right, it makes you realize that even the most powerful empires can collapse if there's enough pressure.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder that the world is always changing.
Yeah, it's never static.
Power is never permanent. Think about it. The British Empire might be gone, but its legacy is still shaping our world today.
Right.
The challenges that it faced, things like economic instability, the rise of new powers, and the fight for self-determination, those are still relevant in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So what can we learn from all of this? What do you think?
That's a good question to consider.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another deep dive. See you next time.
See you then.